Good evening, everyone. My name is Keith Williams. I'm the Vice President for Community Engagement for the Lancaster Conservancy. And on behalf of the Lancaster Conservancy, welcome to Nature Hour. The Lancaster Conservancy's mission is to provide wild and forested lands and clean waterways for our community forever. We protect the ancestral lands of the Susquehannock, the Conestoga, and Shanks Ferry people. And my hope is that we care for these lands as well as Native peoples. For 50 years, our organization has sought out natural places that are so precious and beautiful, they must be protected. Our stewardship team works tirelessly to restore these special places by creating trails, removing invasives, and planting trees. These preserves are then open for you and I to use to hike, hunt, fish, and birdwatch 365 days a year. Special places like Shanks Ferry, House Rock, Kelly's Run, Otter Creek, Pelham Hills, Climbers Run, Welsh Mountain, and many others are protected forever. We launched Nature Hour with the goal of bringing an assortment of local and regional experts directly to your home with presentations that help us all better understand the Conservancy's work and the work of our community partners. The format for tonight's lecture will be 2 short presentations followed by a panel discussion. If you have questions, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will include your questions as part of the conversation. This is the first lecture of our 2023 winter season. Our next Nature Hour will be January 25th, titled York Wildlands, Get Your Elevation On, with our very own Peggy Eppig. We have a number of other events that are in person, including this Saturday with yours truly, Aquatic Insects in Winter at Climbers Run Nature Center. And I'm also going to be one of the instructors for the Wilderness Advanced First Aid class in February, also at Climbers Run. So come on out and join us. You can learn more about these events and others and pre-register for these events by visiting our website, lancasterconservancy.org, under the upcoming events page. The Conservancy is blessed with incredible corporate support, and tonight we want to recognize our annual sponsors, who include Clark Associates, Stauffers of Kissel Hill, LCSWMA, Electron Energy Corporation, Eurofins, Rettew, DART, and PennStone. Without their support, Nature Hour and many other events would not be possible. And now I'd like to introduce tonight's Nature Hour, Welcoming All Faces in Outdoor Spaces, a conversation with Dr. Zeshan Ismat and Felipe Benitez. Dr. Ismat is a professor of geoscience and the chair of the International Studies program at Franklin and Marshall College. More specifically, Zeshan studies how mountains form, the physics and mechanics of mountain building. More generally, she gets paid to hike around the world. And if you've not been on a geology hike with Zeshan, you're really missing out. We're hoping to schedule one this spring. She lives in downtown Lancaster with her husband and 2 daughters, ages 13 and 4. And Felipe Benitez is an award-winning social entrepreneur, proud immigrant, and dad. Felipe is also the founder and executive director of Corazon Latino, an international nonprofit that seeks to reconnect communities of color with nature, arts, and civic engagement through love, compassion, and hope. His visionary work includes, during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, leveraging social media and digital tools to immerse communities around the world in artistic performances while showcasing the importance of connecting with our planet's natural treasures. One of his proudest moments was the production of the signature event for the 2020 National Public Lands Day celebration, in partnership with Toyota, which featured a virtual road trip through iconic parks and forests in the United States. The online event included performances by leading Latino artists such as Lila Downs, Oza Motley, Nico Hinojosa, and Anna Free. This event series reached more than 1 million users on average per month, earning the organization industry awards and recognition for innovation, equity, justice, and inclusion efforts. Through the work with leading organizations like United Way Worldwide, Fenton Communications, and Ogilvy Public Relations, Felipe designed and implemented communications and outreach strategies for advocacy campaigns worldwide, from protecting the fundamental rights of indigenous groups in the Amazon to fighting climate change and helping to protect the rights of immigrants in the United States. And both Zeshan and Felipe are very dear friends of mine, so I feel very privileged, and I'm very grateful that I get to spend the next hour with these 2 special people discussing this really important topic of diversity in the outdoors, and exploring the question of why is diversity in the outdoors important, and how do we achieve that? And I think what we would do for starting the conversation tonight is have Zeshan Ismat take control of the screen and bring up your presentation and start us off with the conversation.
Will do. Thank you for those kind words, Keith. Let me just, is that working? Just want to make sure that works. So
yep, that's great.
Great. So as Keith said, I'm a geologist, so what do I know about environmental justice? And I'll talk a little bit about that. And let's see. Oh, here's the thing. So one thing I'm going to talk about is what is Blackbird's environmental justice and how did this come about? So first, I'll just talk a little bit about what I do. So I study mountains, and I really just hike around the world and look at the different structures that I see in the mountains. Here are a couple photos from the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. This is me teaching some students in the Hudson Valley. So one of the reasons why I got into geology is when I first went on some field trips and some classes in college, I just felt so small, and I loved that feeling. And it made me feel connected to nature in a way that I had never felt before. And it brought this kind of wholeness to my life that was just so special. And every time I go in the field, I relive that feeling, and it's a beautiful feeling. But one thing that I didn't realize is how important and necessary that is to have that connection for a community to thrive. I didn't realize that until later. So just a little background about mountains and how I came about to this environmental justice mission. So mountains, interestingly, hold all of our global wealth. All of our water is sourced from glacier melts. Our natural resources, such as coal, much of our natural gas, minerals that we use, such as metals, they come from mountains. But this is what we do to mountains. We destroy the mountains. We take from the mountains. This right here, can you guys see my pointer? I'm not sure if you can see it, but the picture on the lower right-hand corner, this is from Shamokin, just an hour and a half north of here, just west of Centralia. And this is what we do to the mountains. And here are some of my students walking on, this is called the whaleback. And we do this to the mountains. And, you know, what's interesting is that even though mountains hold the world's wealth, the world's poorest people live in mountains. And there are some stereotypes about mountains. It doesn't have to be just from Appalachia. I meet people from mountains from all over the world, and it's the same stereotypes that they're poor because it's their fault. There's something that they do in their life. They're backwards or uncivilized, whatever that is. There are these stereotypes we have about mountain people. And part of the reason why we don't take care of our mountains is that typically these are outside industries that take the wealth out of the mountains, so they're not invested in the community. And so then you might ask, well, why don't we value the people who live in these mountainous regions? Well, it seems like we're valuing the material resources more than the people. And I keep wondering why. But another question is that if our identity is connected to our land, and if that land is destroyed, either because of climate change or overuse, deforestation, war, whatever it may be, what happens to a community? How can a community come back from that or even thrive? So, well, some people say, well, living in the mountains is a great place. We have these positive ideas of living in mountains, that there's strong family ties, it's less stressful, people are happy, you're in touch with nature. Even that, even if you say these are positive, these are still caricatures and stereotypes that are developed by people living outside of the mountains, not from the voices of the people who live there themselves. So who speaks for a community? And the key is, every community needs its own activists. And these thoughts started getting me on the path of environmental activism. So my story of getting into environmental justice, it actually started, I was doing some field work in Nepal, and I was in this one village that was doing really well. And then I climbed over a ridge and went into another village, probably not even 800 meters away. And financially, economically, doing so much worse. And one of the differences is that the community that was doing well had these things that were called anaerobic digesters. And it just was mind-blowing seeing how it could change a community. So that got me thinking, I felt I couldn't study these mountains anymore without giving back to the people who live there. I travel around the world and I'm just taking and I wanted to give back. And so now I felt like I had a path. So this is just a kind of short summary of how we got to where we are. So these digesters is basically you take compost, you put it in a barrel, any kind of compost, natural waste, organic waste, put it in a barrel, let it sit there for a couple weeks. And in this anaerobic environment, methane is produced. Just like in any compost pile, that goopy stuff at the bottom of the compost pile, it's actually producing methane, which is just natural gas. Well, it's naturally being produced. Why don't we just capture it and produce heat, electricity? Like Oregon Dairy, you might know, the whole farm and store is run just by cow poo, all the methane. And I said, why can't we do this? My family's from Pakistan, and I know how fortunate I am to be in the States and with all these opportunities. But many of my women relatives that live in Pakistan don't have the opportunities. And one of the problems is that they don't have access to gas. If they need gas for cooking or cleaning, they have to ask somebody to get it, a male relative, and they might be busy. So they're always stuck. But with these digesters, they can become independent. So I said, why can't we make these that are easily accessible? Anybody can make them, anybody can fix them. So I started thinking about this. It's just this beautiful full circle. You have your food waste, you can get energy. The leftover food waste turns into this pathogen-free fertilizer, which you can use to grow more food. So why did I want to do this? Is that energy security is not available for everybody. And how can we do this? We can make these small-scale digesters. You get free energy and free, clean, amazing fertilizer. And why? It gives women who are typically unrecognized and not valued more power over their lives, agency, freedom. So why am I emphasizing women? Well, women are the ones globally who do all the cooking, who do all the cleaning, and this would give people their agency over their own lives. And also you can boil water. The leading cause of death for kids around the world is diarrhea from dirty water. And I hesitate showing these pictures because it's pictures of brown and black people. So is this a brown and black issue? And I argue that it's not. What it is, it's a cargo issue. And what do I mean by cargo? Cargo simply means, do you have access to food, water, and energy security? Or even more specifically, food, water, energy, and waste equity. Do we care about our land with the waste? So here's just a model I have in my backyard of a digester that I'm trying out. Everybody wants it to look nice. You can put it in a greenhouse. Everybody aspires to great design. And why do I care about this? You know, there's a lot of reasons. With this, you don't have to frack. You can capture the methane, which is a crazy greenhouse gas. You can reduce waste in the waterways. You can help with sanitation. You can use human waste for this. So all of this is this full circle. It's empowering. It gives freedom. It's sustainable. But that's all cool and good. But what does it really do for my community now? I wanted to do something that's more immediate for my community. In other words, all of these big issues like climate change and waste in the waterways and fracking, I feel that no one really can care about it unless you're really connected with the land. There needs to develop this level of empathy. And I think we can't have this empathy until we feel like we belong to this land and this land is part of us, is part of our identity. So I wanted to do something that's smaller and connects us before we can tackle these big issues about climate change and waste. So then I kept asking myself, what can I do here in Lancaster for this community, for my children? And a lot of it is because my children are brown. How do I make them feel like they belong? And I'll come back to that in a second. So I've talked about our link between land and identity. That's so critical. And honestly, I never thought that it was a big deal. I'm an immigrant and I thought, well, any place in the States is fine for me. it's all the same. And I grew up mostly in Syracuse, and I remember going back to Syracuse a couple of summers ago, and I couldn't believe how connected I felt there. I knew what to say or what to do, and I was so surprised. Geology. So I'm a geologist, and geology is one of the whitest disciplines in the States, probably right behind classics. And I always feel a little left out, or a little, I don't know, like I don't belong in geosciences. And in fact, I started off with in environmental science, but I kept getting drawn to geology because I liked the outdoors and the hiking. But when I do field work, and when I'm camping and when I'm hiking, I typically see just white people in the States. And why is it that these nature-oriented activities, I only see a certain demographic? And who speaks for communities? You know, I can totally geek out about this and talk about some academic reasons why, some of the reasons for this. And if you want, I can talk about it later. But at some level, I didn't really care. What I wanted to do was do something to make a difference, to make a change. So we started this club called Blackbirds. It started with my oldest daughter. And what we really do, our whole mission, is to get kids from marginalized communities just out there, hiking, wading in streams, touching the earth, growing food, making this connection. Because until you have that connection, you may not feel like you belong. Even we do like park cleanups, and it might seem silly, but if you see litter on the ground, and even if you say, well, I didn't make that litter, but if you clean it up, then you say, you know, this is my land. I don't care who did it. I take ownership of it. And just noticing that trash is the first step to saying, yeah, I belong here. This is who we are. You know, those gardens that we see at the art park, Blackbirds helped. This is Lieutenant Stauffers. We helped out with that, giving away free school supplies, doing seed bombs, building tents for camping, picking up trash, hikes. We do a lot of cool things, and it's just for this next generation. You know, and this simply started out as a club for kids with my daughter. I was looking for a Girl Scout troop and I couldn't find one, so we made our own. But the parents wanted more, so it expanded. So we have this club now, and our mission is just to support food, water, and energy and waste equity for everybody, and make sure the next generation of environmental activists are from their own community. So they're speaking, people are speaking from their own community. In other words, is that I want the next generation to be environmental activists from their own community, so they can speak for themselves and know that they matter and their voices matter. So again, you know, when people talk about climate change and how critical it is, and we might be saying, how come nobody's doing anything about it? I think part of the reason is that these big environmental issues might be so big that you want to bury your head in the sand. But also another part is that we might not feel connected. So you can't tackle these big issues until you feel, again, some empathy for it, like you would for if your own family member was sick, you would care. So, you know, in my own research with my students, I've seen a shift over the last 5 years where the students are more interested in doing research that involves real change in real time for their communities. They don't want to do just pure science. They want to do something that really makes a difference. And so the research has become more activist oriented, which I love because it ties in with kind of my interest in environmental justice. So for example, some of the things that we work on is finding freshwater reservoirs. Freshwater, I think, is the biggest geopolitical issue of today. But if we can get students working on where there may be fresh water in some underserved areas, you're actually making a difference. So some of the things that Blackbirds does, we encourage urban gardening in raised beds because of the lead in the soil. We do a lot of lead canvassing. We go door to door, let people know about lead remediation programs. We're even working with Penn Medicine to make a video for new parents. So before they leave the hospital, they know about lead poisoning and some of how you can prevent it. we're trying to change the bus routes to make sure the bus stops at county parks. So the bus stops at playgrounds, but playgrounds are so different from parks where you can wade in the stream and you can actually interact with nature at your pace. Park cleanups, nature hikes with new refugee families. This is important to me too. So I work with a lot of new refugee families, and this is their new home. They've been displaced. So they need, I feel like this is the beginning of a new identity, and we all need to connect with our land, and we can't unless we have those opportunities. Hopefully we'll set up a digester at the wastewater treatment plant so our waste won't go right into the Conestoga. And all of this is community driven. So stuff happens because people want it to. We say, what do people want? And so we have a lot of cool partners that recognize us and want to work with us, which is pretty cool, such as the Lancaster Conservancy. I didn't put them on, but I love working with Keith and the Conservancy. So if you're interested, check out our website. I'm not on social media, but I should get on there so I can figure out what to do. And that's it.
Wow, Zeshan, thank you so much. You know, every time we talk, I come away inspired, and I can see so many more possibilities for intersections. And I mean, you brought up a lot of really great stuff that we'll get into as part of the panel, I think. And so
Thank you.
I think Felipe, you're going to pick right up on this and just continue this great tee up that Zeshan started. So go ahead, Felipe. It's all.
Yes, thank you, Keith. Thank you, Zeshan, for your inspiration. And I'm Felipe Benitez. I'm the executive director and founder of Corazon Latino, and I mean, this is actually where my second nature hour with the Lancaster Conservancy. So last one, I think we did it back in 2021, and the same topic. It's how do we bring diversity? How do we make our public lands more welcoming? So I'm not going to talk a lot about all the scope of the work that we do, but we're in several parts of the country. But we do believe in essentially that about the reciprocity between humans and nature. We strongly believe that if we care for nature, nature is going to take care of us. If we do not, bad things happen. This picture is actually of our work in El Yunque National Forest in Puerto Rico, where we created, in partnership with the Forest Service and Amigos del Yunque, the first ever citizen science project within El Yunque National Forest. Very, very cool stuff. And Keith, a couple of went with us to Puerto Rico and did a lot of really cool stuff. But we truly believe in this reciprocity, and we truly believe in that conservation is an opportunity to really bring people together, to really bring communities together in various ways. Next slide, please. Starting a little bit into the practicalities of what our work means, and just building up from what Zeshan said. We truly believe that it's very important to recognize the different ways, the different manners that communities have of enjoying our natural lands, our green spaces. So again, we truly believe that there's no right or wrong way to enjoy nature. There's just different ways. As valid is the one on the left as the one on the right. As valid is to spend hours in solitude to connect with nature, as it is to play soccer, be loud, be in family, and bring people together. So there's no right or wrong way. What it's important right now, and especially since we've seen as a result of the pandemic, is that we need to be welcoming to everybody. So we need to, the same way we're welcoming the individuals that enjoy nature on a solitude, on our individual or a small group, we need to be engaging, understanding, and welcoming to everybody. So that's one of the missions and one of the work that we do. We do this work with the Forest Service, with the Park Service, and with great partners like Lancaster Conservancy. So this is one of our of the missions of what we do. Next slide, please. And we work a lot with Latino communities, Spanish-speaking communities, limited English proficiency communities. And for us, it's very important that to work and to engage in a meaningful way, we need to do it in language. We need to make sure that we are communicating effectively. And we start with the notion that translations are not enough. And it's not only about translating a phrase or translating a message, is how do we transcript? How do we create messaging? How do we create the programs that resonate with our target communities? So, I mean, things can go wrong with direct translation. And we have here a couple of examples in Spanish and in English. And when we're talking about public lands, it becomes extremely important because bad information, misspelled or inaccurate information can actually cost lives. Next slide, please. So when we were preparing this presentation, Keith asked me to just get a little bit of our insights. So what are the different barriers of entries, opportunities and challenges that we have when bringing communities, especially Latino communities, to green spaces, to our public lands? Let's start by the notion that things have changed immensely since the pandemic, since the beginning of the pandemic. I will adventure to say that before we were trying to find and bring people to public lands, to green spaces during the pandemic, that changed. That doesn't mean that there's not a lot of work to do, but people are there. People are already in green spaces, in our public lands. It's a matter now of making sure that they are welcomed and that they have positive experience. So still some of the elements that we have been able to identify that our work is based on is how to reduce these barriers of entry. How do we make sure that folks enjoy, have access, and have a meaningful experience in our public lands? So the 5 barriers or trends that we see is cost, it's timing, it's transportation, type of activities and equipment, sometimes and information communications. Let me go a little bit in depth into these topics. Next slide, please. Cost. So when you have a public land, an entry fee that is, I don't know, $3, $5, $10 per person or per vehicle, it adds up. So we are very conscious that entry access for those who are not free or those who need an entry fee very easily add up to families. And if you're working, as Zeshan mentioned, it's a new immigrant or a community that it's just getting started in their life in this country, or in a family, if we're working minimum wage or 2 or 3 jobs, this adds up. So costs are very important. So whenever you're considering accessibility, being welcoming, make sure that cost is part of the equation. Next slide, please. Transportation. So is your public land, are green spaces available through public transportation? If not, how can we make it more accessible? Is carpooling an option? Is there are there options to do shuttles or figure out other ways to get people to your public lands and back in a safe and effective and costly and cost-efficient way? Next slide, please. Timing. So as I mentioned, it's very likely that communities of color, BIPOC communities, are already in your public lands, are already enjoying the benefits of nature. But when timing of when activities happen are very different. Again, if you're talking about, for example, a family that works in the service industry, or parents that work in the service industry that work Monday through Saturday, well, you're very likely to find them on Sundays, and you won't find them in the morning. You probably won't find them after in the morning too early, but after church time. So what activities, what kind of engagement you can create for communities that are coming? And usually there's a crossing, like the the more traditional visitation comes in the morning, bird watching, hiking, whatever, and then in the afternoon we change. So timing, it's important, again, just to make sure that you are offering a meaningful and welcoming experience to your public lands. Next slide, please. Equipment. So when we're talking about an event or we're talking about an activity, expect the whole family. And this actually is a picture of an event that we hosted a couple of years ago, and that Keith in his previous life was part of, which was a part of Rio Palooza, or the Shenandoah River, a water activity. And guess what? We brought families, and I love this picture because it is a family affair. It was a family affair, and not everybody was prepared in terms of having the equipment, even the proper clothing to enjoy a Sunday in the river and water-based activities. So expect the family, prepare for them in terms of safety, in terms of age, in terms of physical activity. Make sure that you're welcoming, because this experience will likely determine future experiences and future interactions with your public lands. So make sure that people are ready and people are know what to expect in this type of when you're offering activities. Next slide, please. We believe a lot, if you're organizing events or you're organizing like Zeshan mentioned, anywhere from a cleanup to rafting or whatever, there's basic information that we recommend providing in advance. Know before you go, have the little ones and obviously the parents have all the information they may need, both in English and Spanish. What are the scheduled activities? What about facilities, food and beverage, and amenities if you're hosting an event? Next slide, please. And then use those tools for information like flyers, social media. Make sure that your website, wherever you are promoting your events or activities, are mobile or like are mobile friendly. We believe in having a sign up via text messages. If you have the capacity, if you have the personnel that can provide, have somebody be able to answer questions in that they may encounter. And obviously media is a very powerful way to get the word out. Next slide, please. And facilitate the next adventure. Make sure that every time you are hosting, you are putting together an event, you're thinking about what happened next. What is the next opportunity for engagement with our communities? Next slide, please. Some key dates that I always like bringing as you start developing your planning for the year, anywhere from National Park Week, from Father's Day, World Environment, World Ocean Day, Latino Conservation Week, National Public Lands Day. Those are really important and very effective and powerful dates where we can engage our communities in a meaningful way. Next slide, please. Another element that we wanted to mention is because you are part of and you're engaging in different levels with your communities, make sure that you're there. This is an example in Puerto Rico where during the pandemic, we were able to provide food boxes to communities that live around El Yunque. So never underestimate the power of your organization, never underestimate the power of public lands and how you can be a source for healing, a source for unity, a source for love, even a source for community building within the community. Next slide, please. And here's how you can find me. Hugging a tree. Here's my telephone number and obviously email address. So take it away, Keith.
Yeah, thank you, Felipe. Hugging a tree, that's for sure. That's and thanks for the great trip down memory lane there with work that we've done together on El Yunque and on the Shenandoah. We've got some good questions coming in from the audience, but I thought maybe we would back up a little bit and really start from a most basic question. What exactly is inclusion in the outdoors and how do we define that? And, there's only 3 of us here, right? So we've got 3 different perspectives on that question. So does anybody want to take a first stab at an answer from your perspective, and then the rest of us will chime in?
Go for it, Zeshan. I just spoke for 10 minutes, so your turn.
I guess it's just easy to get to, and you don't even think about it. It just is. You don't have to make a special effort. And if you are different in whatever way, sometimes it takes up a lot of energy being aware of yourself. But if you can go to a place and know you belong without using that energy of being aware of yourself, I think it'll make a huge difference. And I don't think it would be hard to do. I think, if kids just start out early knowing that their voice matters and they can be activists, then they feel like, yeah, I'm just going to walk over to that river and I know what to do. I think sometimes too, in nature areas, whatever that is, can be exclusive because we use fancy words. So for example, when I meet urban gardeners, sometimes, and nothing wrong with the word, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but why do we have to use the word permaculture? Can't we just say we're planting seeds in some soil? Like, we don't have to make it exclusive. It's not complicated. Let's just make it something that everybody can do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so when I think about inclusion, for me, I think about it in the widest sense of the word, right?
Mhm.
That we're not just talking about different races, different colors, but
Yeah.
we're talking about different physical abilities, maybe neurodivergences even, right? Different orientations, and figuring out a way to identify the barriers. And Felipe, I think thank you for that list. I mean, that really resonated, and I think maybe that's the first step, is identifying those barriers and then figuring out how do we get around those barriers. But Zeshan, going off of what you said about Blackbird's approach, it's got to be with community. It can't be done to or for. It's got to be in partnership with. And so whichever community that we're working to engage with, it needs to be authentic, I think, first of all, and for authentic reasons. And maybe we'll get to the reason question next, about the why. Right now we're just defining the what. And for me, I think sometimes those barriers, if it's a perceived barrier, even if it's not real but perceived, it's still a barrier. I mean, that's still there, right? So if I've got folks that don't feel comfortable on a hike because they feel like they're out of shape and they're going to be embarrassed by making the attempt, even if we're not going to do anything to embarrass them, that perception is real, and we need to do something to alleviate that perception. Felipe, you have anything to add about what inclusion looks like for you in the outdoors?
I mean, I think you guys nail it. Importance about advocacy. It's about feeling safe. It's about feeling having the knowledge and being empowered to not only enjoy our public lands, but it's also care for those public lands. And what Zeshan has described and the ways that we are trying to engage in a meaningful way communities, that's for me what at the end of the day it means. And yeah, Keith, it's very important, as you mentioned, that accessibility is obviously a key component of inclusion. Like, how do I make sure that people are welcome, feel part of nature, part of the conservation work. So I think it's very important, and now we have a lot more opportunities to create those welcoming environments, but it's still a long way to go. We still have a long way to go, and again, it's language, is elements like educational, which you guys are doing fantastic job in Lancaster Conservancy. And Keith, you were telling us about accessibility, about the just simply having a transportation. I mean, like that work that you work with academia, that you have this fantastic nature photographers, but they couldn't get to to the side. So how do we reduce those barriers? How do we make people welcome and make sure that they are a part? So what, just to finish that thought, I think he had this opportunity to bring folks into a reserve, photographers, and they couldn't get there. So they needed to get a transportation. So didn't have the grant at that time. So your ED went ahead and just got a bus donated, which that will solve a lot of issues. But it's thinking out those ways to get people in, to feel them welcome, to feel them empowered, to feel them safe, for them to feel safe. And then that builds into advocacy.
Yeah, I love that
One
story.
more thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So another thing, and sometimes when we see visions of people in nature, like Felipe was showing, there's these fancy hiking boots and backpacks, and that could be a barrier because you don't need that to go hiking. But also images, if you go to a website like the Appalachian Trail or some nature place, you often you may not see pictures of yourself, whether it's different ethnicities or different abilities. The other day, nothing against Eddie Bauer, but I went into the store and I walked out. I just felt weird about it. Every picture on there was a white person with fancy hiking gear. And I'm like, those images, they seem subtle, but they're big, and it makes you feel like you don't belong, Yeah.
And that's an excellent point. And I think it's unintentional, but it's something that we really need to pay attention to.
100%.
And it's those subtleties that I think we really need to listen to, and I think the way to do that is to engage the community, like you're doing with Blackbirds. And so, Felipe, I love that story about the bus because that happened relatively early on in my time with the Conservancy, and it really told me the heart of this organization, that a barrier to getting underrepresented kids outside was identified. And my supervisor, dear friend, now our acting president, our interim president, Fritz Schroeder, went to LCSWMA and got a mini bus donated from LCSWMA that eliminated that barrier and enabled us to get kids from Lancaster City out onto the Climbers Run Preserve 1 day a week for the whole duration of the spring semester. And now we're looking at repeating that again this year. And that just told me the heart of the leadership here. And so I'm pretty thrilled about that. And besides the effect that it had on those students and our ability to reach more underserved kids. So, we're spending a lot of time talking about inclusion and diversity in the outdoors. But why? I mean, why is this important?
Because that's the color of our nation. That's how our nation is part of, and if we want, you've seen it in the work that we do in Puerto Rico. If you want community engagement, if you want stewardship, if you want for communities to be part of the decision making of our public lands, you need to engage them. So I do think that as one of the main champions in the Forest Service told me, one of our Corazon Latinos Forest Service, Michiko Martin, when we started working with them, they said, our public lands are one of the most democratic elements of our nation, because everybody, regardless of where they come from, what language they speak, their immigration status, they all have the right to enjoy our public lands, and they also have the responsibility to care for them. So for me, that's a very powerful. And if we want for a diverse nation to be part of the decision-making process of what happens to our own land, what happens to our own earth, we need to engage them in every possible way. Obviously, we know that only it's obviously not the case, and very few make a lot of decisions on behalf of a lot, but we want to make that change. So for me, that's the most important reason we are in this work, and we promote civic engagement, and we promote that inclusivity in our nation's public lands.
Yeah, excellent. Zeshan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I feel like people talk about when a language is lost, how that culture is lost too. And I feel that same way with our connection with the land, because our land, if we feel like we belong there, we feel more that we matter. We feel more willing to use our voice. We feel more willing to be advocates. And it strengthens your community because you know you matter. And I know it's made sound a little hippy dippy, but I really think it's true. It's like, without that connection, it's like a language dying. It's so much a part of us and we can't ignore it. You know, we need it to thrive.
Yeah, and you know, for me, it spans the gap, and I think the primary driver of why I think inclusion is so important in the work that we do as the Conservancy, and in specifically, but in public lands and access to open space and green space in general, is what you said in your presentation, Zeshan. You know, that when you're out there, you feel small, and I'm reading because I quoted it. You feel small, connected, and whole, right? And that for me, I feel the same way when I'm outside, right? And that resets my attitude. It resets my spiritual gauge. It resets everything. So if I'm having a bad day, all I got to do is go outside for a couple minutes, and I get the perspective comes back. The right perspective comes back, and it's been that way my whole life. I mean, I've depended on those green spaces my entire life for that comfort and that solace and that guidance. And I just feel like it's just ethically wrong if everybody doesn't have that opportunity, you know. And so that's really the primary driver. And as I'm reminded frequently by Fritz, it's just the right thing to do, period, right? But there is a pragmatic piece to this, and Felipe, you nailed it, right? The complexion of our nation is changing, and if we want the next generation of conservationists, if we want all the strides that we made as a conservation community over the last 50 years, after the last century, to continue, then we need to figure out a way of how to effectively engage the new nation, right? How do we effectively engage all people? Because if we just keep on trying to engage one portion of that, we're not going to have the critical mass that we need to have the political clout to continue this work. And so, you know, for me, it spans both ends of that spectrum. The primary driver is it's just the right thing to do because of the effect that being outside has had on me my whole life and continues to have on me. And so let's talk about some of those barriers a little bit more, Felipe, because we got a really good question from someone in the audience about, you know, the barriers that we talked about. How much of those the barrier information is applicable to South Central Pennsylvania, where the Conservancy is located specifically? And I know I have my opinions on that, but I would like to hear both of your opinions, Zeshan and Felipe, before I chime in on that.
Well, I do believe that there's always a lot of more that can be done. I mean, obviously, the Pennsylvania, I mean, the different entities for mostly Park Service, the different state and local entities. There's a good number of resources available in different languages. That there's a big effort to make sure that there are park rangers, forest rangers, individuals that are working and caring for that look like us, that speak our language, or at least there's resources to connect with members of the public. But unfortunately, it's never enough. I think for me, it's always about safety. It's about making sure that we are making experiences that are memorable, that are positive, and especially talking about immigrant communities, there's still a lot of challenges. I mean, last year, we were having conversations about them in the northeastern part of Pennsylvania, in Great Towers and all this area with a lot of the Delta. Can't remember the name of the river. Sorry, near New York.
Delaware. I think that goes, but Delaware goes past
exactly.
there.
So a lot of really serious problems about drownings, about how people, families, individuals especially during the summer, underestimate or the power of nature, and how unfortunately we're having a lot of instances of drownings among Latino and communities of color. So that's something that we need to address. And that's, again, although there's a lot that has been accomplished, there's a lot of of great resources. Oops, that was that. That are available. There's still a lot to be done, and for me, the most important is safety. Safety is such an important to make sure that we have an enjoyable and meaningful experience in nature.
You know, I just wanted to add what Felipe had said in his talk about different ways that we appreciate and work with nature. It doesn't all have to be hiking and camping, you know, and maybe that's something to emphasize, like having a picnic is still being part of nature, even though it's not advertised as like a nature outing. But maybe something like that, I would love to see more of that on you know, state parks websites. It's not just camping, it's all these different things, like, you know, playing volleyball or whatever it is. But transportation, I think, is key too. You know, easy transportation. It's just something in the States, there's not good public transportation to begin with, but transportation would be great. And starting with kids, I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, and you know, that list that you presented there, Felipe, I could certainly see relevance to South Central Pennsylvania, at least in my experience here. And transportation certainly is a great example of that, Zeshan. I mean, look at what you're dealing with in the city of Lancaster, just to get Central Park, which is within the city, a stop in the public transit system, right? And then when we talk about our preserves, which are, you know, relatively close to Lancaster City, many of them are 15-minute, maybe 20-minute drive, but it's still a drive, right? So you have to have access to a vehicle to get to these places. And so it's something that we as an organization are really working through and thinking through, you know, how exactly do we make our preserves more accessible to every member of our community, regardless of transportation status or health status. And then, you know, going through the rest of that list, there's certainly relevance, I think, to all those, with certainly some, you know, geographic specific nuances. One of those things I think is perception, though, you know, and I think that goes back to like your experience in Eddie Bauer, where you didn't see anybody that looked like you, you know. And I know, you know, I'm an old white guy, and I go on some of our preserves in the South End, and I don't feel super comfortable in those preserves in the South End, especially if I don't have my ranger gear on. And even if I have a ranger gear on, because I don't have any enforcement authority, I still feel a little off. And you know, it makes me wonder how somebody who is opposite me in appearance might feel if they're in that same space, right? And just I don't have an answer to that. I understand it. I think that perceived barrier to enjoying an open space. And Felipe, you know, that's the second time you brought up the point of accepting differences in how people enjoy the outdoors. And the first time you brought it up, it made total sense to me, but it also made me think about leave no trace principles and practices, right? Because there's not exact alignment, which is okay, right? But being comfortable without that alignment, and it really expanded my thinking on how we define people enjoying nature.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. That was a big challenge that we have, is about the outdoor ethics and making sure that we are again caring for the land, making sure that we're leaving it better than we found it, which is hard, and it takes education. Although for the communities we serve, it's embedded in us that we need to do it, that we're part of the land, that we're part of nature. But still hard, and I think those are one of the many challenges that we have. But I think with proper education, proper knowledge, and resources, I think there's a lot that can be done. Yeah,
absolutely. And you know, this is just the beginning of what I hope will be a long-term conversation with the Conservancy. I know the Conservancy is committed to diversity. We just completed an internal workshop that was presented by the YWCA that was just fabulous, just absolutely excellent. I know I got a lot out of it, and we're in the process of forming an internal review committee to really look at our practices, both internally and externally, to continue the conversation that was started about what can we do as an organization to promote diversity in the widest sense of the word, both internally in terms of our staff, our leadership team, and our board, but also externally facing. How can we better serve our community? And again, in the widest sense of the word, community, so that every member of our wonderful neighborhood here has access and the ability and the desire to come outside and enjoy these green spaces, and hopefully they get the same benefit out of those places that I do. And so thank you both for your time, commitment to this work, your wealth of knowledge and all of your experience in sharing that with us. Do you have any closing thoughts?
Oh, one thing I was thinking, it might, that's just a thought, it might help by bringing nature to communities and then they can come, like maybe a small little garden, like a raised bed garden, just getting comfortable with it, or I don't know if that's the way to do it, but I wish it was more a part of our everyday world, so bringing it to us rather than having to go somewhere. I don't know if there's a way to do that. I'm still kind of thinking about it, so that wasn't a well-formed thought, but
no, but it's an excellent point, and it's spot on. So yes, I don't know how yet.
I don't know how, but
we have some ideas that we're testing out.
cool.
And I don't think there's any one right answer either. I don't
Yeah.
think there's any one way of doing that. I think there's a bunch of different possibilities and partnerships that can form in the process of making that happen. In fact,
like maybe
Felipe
a
and
playground could have some sort of a
like a nature play area or
developed nature
something.
trail.
Yeah, right, totally.
You
And
know,
Felipe and I worked on a
campfires.
project that did that. Remember the work we did where we had the communities from Prince George's County go outside in their local green space, and then they came to North Bay as an intermediate. And then the final thing was like more of a wilderness experience
cool.
at a national forest. And that was really successful. That was great.
That's neat.
Yeah. So it was stepwise, to your point, Zeshan, right? It started in the neighborhood.
Because everybody can get to the playgrounds. There's a playground in every neighborhood. It'd be neat to have some sort of like a nature trail or something like that.
Yeah.
And also one last thing, it's also don't underestimate the power of technology. We can do a lot through technology, a lot of like I mean, it's not obviously, it sounds counterintuitive to get people to enjoy nature by using devices, but I think it's doable, and I think that's the next opportunity that we have to really create those meaningful engagements. So yes.
Yeah, well, thank you both so much for this really important conversation. And again, this is just the beginning, I think, for us as a conservancy to really work towards being more inclusive. For all of you joining us tonight, thanks for spending your Wednesday evening with us, talking about this really important topic. If you are interested in this work, let us know about that, and stay tuned for more sessions similar to this.
Thank
Good night,
you,
everybody.
Keith. This was great. And Kelly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.